30 years ago, in 1993, a global phenomenon was created. A socially conscious company inclusive of people of all faiths, nationalities, and ethnicities, with a vision to make the world a better place. Now, 30 years on, this venture, the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series, consists of 321 titles, podcasts, blogs, vlogs, merch, even pet food. The books have been translated into 43 languages, and an estimated 500 million copies are in circulation in 100 countries around the world. How many of you have read a Chicken Soup book? I love them. I love these books almost as much as I enjoy chicken soup itself. There is something for absolutely everyone. Chicken soup for the cancer survivor's soul, for the teenager's soul, for the mother's soul, for the pet lover's soul, for the gardener's soul, and even for the golfer's soul. And believe me, golf can be soul-destroying. My favorite, not surprisingly, is Chicken Soup for the Jewish Soul, published in 2001. In the third book of the series, the world was introduced to an Irish poet by the name of Valerie Cox and her wonderful poem, The Cookie Thief. This evening, I'd like to share it with you and to consider together several lessons we can learn from it about our lives and what we can take from it into the new year. The Cookie Thief. A woman was waiting at the airport one night with several long hours before her flight. She hunted for a book in the airport shop, bought a bag of cookies, and found a place to drop. She was engrossed in her book, but happened to see that the man beside her, as bold as could be, grabbed a cookie or two from the bag between, which she tried to ignore to avoid a scene. She read, munched cookies, and watched the clock as the gutsy cookie thief diminished her stock. She was getting more irritated as the minutes ticked by, thinking, if I wasn't so nice, I'd have blackened his eye. With each cookie she took, he took one too. When only one was left, she wondered what he'd do. With a smile on his face and a nervous laugh, he took the last cookie and he broke it in half. He offered her half, and he took the other. She snatched it from him and thought, oh, brother, this guy has some nerve. And he's also so rude. Why, he didn't even show any gratitude. She had never known when she had been so galled, and sighed with relief when her flight was called. She gathered her belongings and headed for the gate, refusing to even look at the thieving ingrate. She boarded the plane and sank in her seat and sought her book, which was almost complete. As she reached in her baggage, she gasped with surprise. There was her bag of cookies in front of her eyes. If mine are here, she moaned with despair, then the others were his, and he tried to share. Too late to apologize, she realized with grief that she was the rude one, the ingrate, the thief. So this is tonight's mashal, our parable, our poem. Much like the classical midrashim, its wisdom is derived from real life. New, so what do we learn from it? The first thing that I infer from this poem is that we be careful not to judge others prematurely or be quick to jump to conclusions. It's so easy to do. We misjudge others. We impugn their motives. We question the sincerity of those in our family, in our workplace, in our social circles. We exercise what psychology calls cognitive bias. We seek shortcuts. We draw conclusions. We other and stereotype. Just look at our little story, how easy it is to misjudge the intention of others. The presumed cookie thief is assumed to be bold and gutsy. He has nerve, he is rude, he is ungrateful and ingrate. These are strong words, but they're built on very weak foundations. Our sacred Torah discourages this, what I will call personality tagging, insisting instead that we reserve our judgment and give others the benefit of the doubt to which they are entitled. For giving others the benefit of the doubt can seed gardens of kindness and of love. Our holy Mishnah teaches, "Vehevei dan et kol ha'adam l'chaf zchut." Judge all people favorably. Simple, right? But it's also in our self-interest, too, as Rashi points out. We are to judge every person as meritorious. On everything that you might hear about another person, say that they intended it for good, until we know for certain that it is not so. If you judge in this way, then you will be judged from heaven as meritorious. Similarly, Bartanura, a 15th century Italian rabbi, taught, when the matter is hanging in the balance, and there is no way to decide in this way or that way, and one might be inclined to judge unfavorably, it is pious to judge favorably. So should this be true generally, ala chat kama v'chama, how much the more so as we reach Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. Ostensibly, here in our Beit Knesset, we ask that God judge us with a measure of midat rachamim, with compassion and understanding. Should not compassion and understanding be afforded to our families and to our friends? On Rosh HaShanah, we should not judge ourselves all that harshly either. Sure, we will this Yontif stand up and beat our breasts and make vidui pad, verbal confession, but you know what? We can also be too critical of ourselves. Beat ourselves up over failings of commission or failings of omission. For we are created b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. We have all the potential in the world, but we're not perfect. None of us are perfect. We are construction sites, always under repair or renovation, a bit like the JFK airport in New York. And perhaps we should be more forgiving of ourselves for whatever dust we may happen to kick up. The second lesson I derive from this poem is the importance of seeing others, being responsive to their unspoken worries and concerns, to resist moving through life with our heads down, scrolling our phones, looking to see who else might have contacted us by email or text message or phone. For how can we see each other? How can we empathize with others if we are unfocused, otherwise occupied? Like the cherubim, who were positioned facing towards one another above the Mishkan, Or like the angel of God about whom we read tomorrow, who sees Hagar's desperate, thirsty, sun-baked plight in the reading. We are obliged, expected, required to turn our faces to others, to see our neighbor, to see our friend and the stranger. For they are, as Pastor Rick Warren says in his book, The Purpose-Driven Life, part of the community of my life. Was anyone else struck, as I was, how in the story, two people sitting next to one another could manage to hardly interact at all? In The Cookie Thief, she watched the clock. She was engrossed in her book. She gathered her belongings without a word. She refused to look at the thieving ingrate. She did not for a moment think to greet him. And she never smiled and was oblivious to his. She wanted to blacken his eye, but she never smiled. And smiling is a big deal. In our Masorah, our tradition, none other than Shammai teaches us to greet each other b'sever panim yafot, pleasantly, with a cheerful expression. Imagine that. It's ironic. Shammai, who Rabbi Joshua Hammerman observed was one of the most ornery people in all of Jewish history, famous for always being in a bad mood, often chasing people away when he was annoyed by their questions, yet it was Shammai Take who says in Pirkei Avot, "V'hevei mekabel et kol ha'adam b'sever panim yafot," that we should always receive others cheerfully with a shena punim. It costs nothing to smile. In the 19th century, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch wrote, "It enriches those who receive it without making poorer those who give it." It takes only a moment, but the memory of it can last forever. We don't smile enough. Likewise, the Talmud says of Yochanan ben Zakkai, the greatest rabbi of his era, that he was always the first to greet others. Again, Rabbi Hammerman observes that he could have rested on his status and waited for people to come to him. But he greeted them first. He made it his business to always greet others first. Yet COVID has, I fear, left us more than just a collection of old masks in our drawers and our jackets and our cars. We have also assumed some rather unfortunate habits. Many I've noticed, and not always, I assume, out of concern for hygiene, have stopped from shaking hands. That's a loss. For Hasidic wisdom recalls that a teacher named Reb Aryeh was known to, when greeting another person, to take that person's hand in his own and hold it in a loving, caressing way that his students said was electric with holiness. It's as if he sent God's energy directly into the other person's heart. We need to recall always that greeting someone cheerfully is not just a nice thing to do, but it's a mitzvah. It's a prayer. Every handshake is a prayer. One can't help but think, if the two cookie monsters were only to have both smiled at one another, greeted one another, talked with one another, even shaken hands, the whole misfortune might have been avoided. The third point I take from our simple poem is about listening. Listening requires concentration. To actively listen requires that we pay attention to the voice's inflection, its tone, aware of what is said and what is not being said, observant of their sighs and their silences. In tomorrow's Sidra, what we read tomorrow tells of an angel of God who hears the cry of the boy Ishmael. In our closest circles, as well as the widest reaches of our world, the voice, the cry of Ishmael is pleading with us. Hear us. Pay attention. But are we listening? Are we seeing them? Boy, time does not permit us to chase down any more rabbinic rabbit holes, but I do wish to make just a couple short points. First, there is holiness in sharing our life's journey with others, even if only for a short time. Kedusha in seeing and hearing and smiling and being with and available to the others in our lives, greeting them with warmth, consistently and without fail. People who do that make us feel so good being in their presence. As we enter the new year, let us resolve to be unlike the cookie thief and never leave the transit lounge of our lives with unfinished business based on faulty assumptions, for we will then be loaded with regret. And as we learn at this season, time is not infinite, and the future is not promised. We may have only today. And if we don't apologize now, extend forgiveness now, if we don't make teshuvah now, if we don't draw near to each other now, we may find, like the cookie thief, that we're sitting one day on a plane with a bag full of cookies, and we'll all be too late. Ken Yiratzon, and thank you for the privilege of listening to me tonight.